thank you for thank our team for leading us this morning. So, hey, number one, I want to thank you just for being the church that you are. I am so proud to be the pastor of Crossbridge Community Church. And I say that, it was really interesting because leading up to Easter, I had a little bit of, maybe a little bit of fear that everybody was going to show up at the same time. And we knew that if you did, we were going to have a problem. And so what we did is we pushed you, we challenged you to say either come at 8 o'clock or come on Saturday night last weekend, and you did it. In fact, it was amazing. The biggest service, think about 6 services across 2 campuses, the largest service was Saturday night. That says something about you. 424 of you showed up on Saturday night. And really what it did is it balanced the entire weekend. And for the first time, I believe, I'm pretty confident in saying this, 99% sure, first time in Crossbridge history, we crossed the 2,000 barrier for an Easter Sunday. And even larger than that, as I preached and as I shared about the power of the resurrection, and at the end of that service, I could look out and see so many different hands raised of people who just saying, we challenged you the question, right? Do you believe in the resurrection? And there were hands all across this room who were believing for new life, for God to give them new perspective and do a new thing. And that's the most exciting thing that came out of the weekend. So thank you. Like I said, I'm thankful for you. This morning we have a special opportunity. I don't give away this easily. I give it to. I enjoy preaching to you, and I enjoy our staff. And I know you do too. They preach to you. But we have a special guest. His name is Michael Chitwood. And I'll tell you, I trust Michael fully. In fact, I have looked forward to this weekend for months. And I tried to get him a while back, and it didn't work out, and we've been going back and forth. And Michael is the National Director of Team World Vision out of Chicago. And Michael and I went to school together at Olivet. I am older, just so you know. We went to school together. He was a defensive end at Olivet Nazarene University. He weighed about 250 pounds at that time. He looks a little different now. And he has done a wonderful work that he's going to share more with you about. Some of the things, though, that I think are pretty incredible. He's ran over 12 marathons. 12, right? Yeah, that's worth a while. He's done 7 Ironmans. He's done a 56-mile race, and he's done a 100-mile run. And isn't that incredible? But I'll tell you what, that's something kind of cool, but really what's incredible is the vision that God has given him and the vision that God is fulfilling. And God is doing across the country. It's amazing. In fact, last night we had an amazing service, and I'm excited. I am excited for you to hear from him today. Would you give him a warm welcome, Mr. Michael Chitwood?
Thanks so much, Kevin. It's so great to be here with you all. Like Kevin said, we go way back. My brother Dan was actually a real close friend and mentor of Kevin's, and so I've known Kevin since I was in college, but gotten to follow all that he's doing in ministry since then. And it's honestly one of the greatest privileges I have is to get to come to new churches that I haven't been to before and join brothers and sisters in Christ and just share a bit of my story and a bit of what God's done in my life. And I hope that something I share today will connect with some of you. There's a verse from Scripture that has become a hallmark in my life. Once in a while, we come across a verse that changes the entire way we understand God's love for us. And I'm going to share a verse like that with you. And then later on, we're going to unpack it. The verse comes from Psalms. It's Psalm 34:18. And the verse says, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted, and he rescues those whose spirits are crushed." The Lord is close to the brokenhearted, and he rescues those whose spirits are crushed. We're going to come back to that a little later in the service. When I was a kid, I desperately wanted to play the drums, but my parents wanted me to play the piano instead. So they forced me to take piano lessons. And I didn't practice ever, and so my piano teacher got frustrated with me, and after about 3 years of not practicing piano and wasting my parents' money, they finally let me quit piano lessons and bought me a drum set. There is still, after just 3 years of wasted piano lessons, there's one song I can still play the intro to on the piano, and the song is the theme song from a movie called Chariots of Fire. Now, if you remember the movie Chariots of Fire, it's a running movie, and I didn't care anything about running when I was a kid, but it's kind of interesting that's the only song I can play still. The movie is about an Olympic runner, Eric Liddell. And Eric wanted to be an Olympian, but he also knew he wanted to be a missionary someday. And his sister Jenny was really frustrated with him that he was pursuing this silly thing, pursuit of the Olympics. And he had just missed a prayer meeting. And in the movie, there's a scene where he's just missed a prayer meeting, and his sister is mad at him. And she's telling him, quit this silly pursuit of the Olympics. And here's what Eric tells her. He says, Jenny, I believe God made me for a purpose, but he also made me fast. And when I run, I feel his pleasure. Well, a couple of years ago, me and some of my friends from Team World Vision were at a restaurant waiting for a table, and my friend Johnny Huddle had recently been in a discussion about this scene from the movie with a mentor of his, and they were discussing that question. And so Johnny turns to me, and he's telling me the story, and he says, so Michael, when do you feel God's pleasure? Well, Johnny is one of those people who just asks really heartfelt questions and can see right into you. And he thought the question was kind of casual, but it completely rocked me. Came out of left field. I was dumbfounded, and I racked my brain for an answer, something that Johnny might believe. But he's one of those guys that could see right through you and into your soul. And I knew if I made something up, he'd be able to tell I was lying. So I just got real with Johnny for a minute, and I just said, when do I feel God's pleasure? You know, John, I guess not that often. I got real quiet, and John could tell that question cut me in my spirit really hard, and he just dropped it. But I couldn't let it go. I wrestled with that question for weeks. When do I feel God's pleasure? It just didn't make sense to me at all. Sometimes I felt his presence. Occasionally I felt his comfort. But I wasn't sure I ever felt his pleasure. You see, while the previous 10 years of my life had held some amazing experiences, they had also held for me more pain and heartache than I could have ever imagined possible. So I want to share a little bit of my story with you, and then later on we'll come back to John's question. I grew up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, which is about as much in the bubble as you can get. It was a pretty safe life. I didn't know anything about poverty or violence or any of that stuff. I went to a great school, one of the best schools in the state of Michigan. I had a great group of friends. I had two older brothers that were my heroes, Dan and Dave, two parents that loved me. I was involved in church, in young life, in sports, and honestly, life was pretty easy for me. I started playing football up in Grand Rapids. We started in second grade, full tackle football, and I played all the way through college, where, as you heard Kevin say, I was a defensive end and weighed about 250 pounds. When I tell people I played college football, they usually think I was a quarterback or a kicker. And when they say kicker, I usually get a little offended because we all know that kickers are soccer players that we let on the team. Sorry if there's any kickers in the room. Well, when I finished college football, I swore off two things: morning workouts and running. I absolutely hated running. In football, if I was running, it meant I was being punished or I had missed a tackle. Well, right after college, I became a fifth grade teacher in Kankakee, Illinois, which is just the same town as Olivet. And I was a teacher at a school very unlike the one I taught in. I was a school with mostly kids from broken homes and impoverished backgrounds. In fact, in 3 years of teaching, I only had 2 kids that came from a home with both parents in it. It was after my second year of teaching that I got invited on my first trip to a developing country. And I went with my dad on a trip to Haiti, the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere. And I'll never forget the first 2 words I learned in Haitian Creole. Moi grand goût. Moi grand goût. I'm hungry. I'm hungry. Young kids would run alongside the vehicles we were in, holding on to them, saying those words into us. I'm hungry. I'm hungry. Well, I'd never seen anything like this. I'd seen poverty. The first homeless person I ever met was a 5th grade student in my classroom. But I'd never seen anything like this. Kids with no food to eat, no water to drink, no shelter, and no idea where their next meal was coming from. So I came back from Haiti with an application to teach there. I thought, that's what I'll do. I'm going to move to Haiti and be a teacher. But when I started telling people my plan, they started telling me what a stupid idea it was, and I shouldn't do it. It wasn't safe. And so I was getting married the next year, and I started letting those voices get in my head, and I froze. I chickened out, and I let fear get the best of me. And despite feeling that tug on my heart that I was supposed to do something to help these kids, I ignored that whisper from God. Instead, I took a really great job with Youth for Christ, doing high school ministry. Now, I got to tell you, my time at Youth for Christ, I was there 7 years as a volunteer and 5 years on full-time staff. It was amazing. I absolutely loved that ministry. But I knew deep in my heart I had ignored a call from God to serve the poor. It was during my first year of Youth for Christ ministry and my first year of marriage that I had my first real personal experience with pain. Up until that point, I'd really never had, the worst thing that ever happened to me was maybe a girlfriend breaking up with me in high school. Well, it was a campus life night, and I'd come home from being with the students, and I'd gone to bed early that night, so I didn't even hear the phone ring in the other room. And I didn't wake up until my wife bursts in the room, and she says, Michael, wake up, something has happened to your dad. And I get on the phone, and I can barely even understand my mom through her hysterical crying. And what had happened was my dad had gone in that day for a routine shoulder surgery to have his rotator cuff repaired. He should have been in one day and out the next. But they gave him too much morphine in the recovery room, and he'd slipped into a coma. So me and my brother Dan loaded up our families and drove the 3 hours from Champaign, Illinois to Grand Rapids, Michigan. And we stood there with my mom and my brother Dave around my dad's bedside holding hands for 3 days, praying for a miracle. Because you see, we serve a God of miracles, right? So we serve a God that can heal the sick and raise the dead. And we knew for certain God would heal my dad and he would sit up in that bed and be okay. I knew absolutely for certain God was going to give us a miracle. And when he didn't, and my dad passed away on Mother's Day 2001, 3 days after his surgery, it absolutely wrecked my faith. Everything I thought I knew about God was different. Here I was in my first year of full-time ministry, my first year of marriage, and I can barely even bring myself to talk to God. It was 2 years later, almost to the day, that I got another phone call that changed my life. This one was from one of my high school buddies, Mark Smith. Mark had been a big guy like me. He was a linebacker, but he'd lost all this weight and started running races. And he was calling to tell me he was coming to Chicago to run the Chicago Marathon. And he asked would I make the 2-hour drive up to watch him. Notice Mark asked me to watch him run the marathon. He did not invite me to run the marathon with him. I had taken my commitment to no more morning workouts and no running extremely seriously. But I had also kept eating like a defensive end. And so I'd put on some more weight. By this time I was about 265 pounds and I couldn't run around the block if someone was chasing me. But I heard a whisper that I'm certain was the Holy Spirit. Just 2 words. Do this. So I hung up the phone, went in the other room, and I told my wife, I'm going to run the Chicago Marathon. And luckily she didn't do that. She didn't laugh at me. She just said, you could do this. Now, I'd never run a 5K. I'd never done any race in my life. I wasn't even certain how long a marathon was. It's 26.2 miles, just so you know. Over the next 6 months, I trained slowly, extremely slowly. I was so slow, my friends would say, hey, Chitwood, I thought you were training to run the marathon. I'd say, I am training to run the marathon. They say, oh, I keep seeing you walking all over town like you're on your way to the grocery store or something. And I'd have to explain to them that running means different things to different people, and I was a slow runner. Well, I may have been slow, but God did something amazing in my life out on those runs. I started talking to him again. Sometimes I was screaming at him. Sometimes I would pull over to the side of the road and just start sobbing. But sometimes I was listening. On October 15th, 2003, I towed the starting line of my first race ever, the Chicago Marathon. It was electric. There were 35,000 other people standing there with me, 1.5 million spectators. Now, Mark and I had not discussed a race strategy. We were going to try and run it together, but he had trained to run 9 minutes per mile. I had trained just to finish before they closed the course, right? Which meant about 12.5 minutes per mile. And so, as we were talking on our way to the start line, we decided to split the difference. Well, that was a really dumb idea for me and a good idea for Mark, because it meant I was going to run about 1.5 to 2 minutes faster per mile than I trained. We get into it, and I'm feeling great. I really am feeling great. And a few miles in, I see a guy up ahead of me running on a prosthetic leg. And I come up to him, and I say, come on, buddy, you got this. And I keep going, I'm feeling great till about halfway through the race. The wheels come off. I hit the wall, they call it. and I have to start walking. And I pretty much had to walk the entire back half of that marathon. And about mile 20, I hear someone yell to me, "Come on, buddy, you can do this." You got one shot at who that was. It was the guy on the prosthetic leg coming past me. That race was terrible. It was horrible. It was brutal. I almost quit. I didn't think I was going to make it. I was crying the last 5 miles, and it absolutely changed my life, physically, spiritually, and emotionally. And I decided that day I would do a race like that every year for the rest of my life. So 2 years later, I did a race the next year. I did a race next year, but 2 years later, I see what I did there. I did do a race the next year. I did a mountain run. The next year, but 2 years later, I heard about the Ironman. Ironman is a 2.4-mile swim, 112-mile bike, and a 26.2-mile run. When I signed up, I didn't own a bike and I didn't know how to swim. That's a true story. But I was scared. But I had seen what fear can do to you. Fear had kept me from moving to Haiti. Fear almost made me quit my first marathon. And I've come to believe that almost every amazing thing that God has for us in this life is on the other side of fear. And we have to step through fear to get to it. Well, I'm so glad I did, because it was one day out on an 85-mile, 5-hour bike ride in the cornfields of central Illinois by myself, riding into the headwinds, that God gave me a vision. The conversation went something like this: "Hey, Michael, you could use these races to help those kids like the ones you met in Haiti." And my mind started racing, and I started picturing all these different colored jerseys at the runs I'd been to, red and purple and yellow and green, different charities represented. But as I racked my brain, I could only think of medical charities, good charities. But I couldn't picture any charities running on behalf of the poorest communities in the world. So I raced home and I wrote down all my ideas, and by the grace of God, I found myself connected to some folks from World Vision. And World Vision I didn't know, but World Vision is the largest Christian humanitarian relief and development organization in the world. And a few months after God gave me that vision, I had the opportunity to become the first ever Team World Vision staff person. And we started Team World Vision as a way to invite people like me, people who hated running, people who didn't think they could do it. We invited people to take on the challenge of running a marathon and to change the lives of the poorest children and communities on the planet. And that first year, we had just 100 people run the Chicago Marathon with us. But over the past decade, we've helped nearly 25,000 people cross finish lines and raised about $25 million for clean water projects in Africa. So you see, I've had a front row seat to see God do some amazing things in this world. But I've also had some more heartache along the way. In 2009, we lost my brother David to alcoholism, obesity, and depression. He was 38 years old. He had 4 young kids he left without a dad, and a young wife, widowed. And then just as I was catching my breath and getting back up on my feet, just over 2 years ago, a couple weeks before Christmas, we lost my brother Dan. He went upstairs to get ready for his daughter's 8th grade basketball game, and he never came down. No explanation. He also had 4 young kids he left without a dad, young wife widowed, and as if losing my dad wasn't enough to break my mom's heart, losing 2 of her 3 sons completely broke her. And it absolutely crushed my spirit. My brothers were my best friends. It could be that there are some of you here today who are heartbroken, who are crushed. Let me go back to John's question. My friend Johnny asked me, when do you feel God's pleasure? And the question just didn't make sense in my spirit. And in the weeks after he asked it, a different question kept coming to my mind. Why should I get to feel God's pleasure? I thought of my World Vision sponsored child, Maureen, and her mom, Josephine. When I met Maureen, she was just 3 years old, and they had literally no access to safe water in their community. In fact, Maureen and her mom had to take a jerry can, which is like a gas can, and walk 2 miles down a mountain every day, 2 or 3 times a day, fill it up in a river of contaminated water that would make them sick, and take it back home. Child mortality rate in her community was 50%. Most of us as Americans don't even know what child mortality means. Child mortality means number of kids who die before age 5. 50% of the kids in her community die before they turn 5 years old. And the number one cause of death lack of clean, safe water. Well, as I thought about Maureen and Josephine's life, the question that hit me was, when does she get to feel God's pleasure? When does she get to feel God's pleasure? And what would ever make me think that I have the right to? A few weeks after Johnny asked that question, I gave him the best answer I could find. I said, Johnny, there's a little girl in Kenya, in the Rift Valley, who I've met a few times. And since the first time I've met her, I've gone back 5 more times to see her community. Maureen and Josephine are the poorest friends I have in this world. Her mom can't even afford to buy the small piece of dirt on which her thatch roof mud home sits. She has worries and fears the likes of which I've never had to know. When her husband left her with 6 kids and no way to provide for their most basic needs, she felt hopeless. But now she has a hope. Because while Josephine has been praying for a better life for her kids, back home in the U.S., thousands of people who were scared to death to run a marathon, who never thought they could do it, stepped through fear and did it anyway, and asked their friends to give money to help a mother and her kids on the other side of the planet. And I get to see a family transformed by the love of strangers a world away. Over the past few years since Johnny first asked that question, I've identified 3 times when I truly feel God's pleasure. One is when I'm with Maureen and her family. That little girl, look at her, she's so silly. Now this, if you're in this rural village in Kenya, you'll know this personality just stands out. Her whole family is quiet and kind of demure, and she's this wild, crazy, loving human being. And she has shown me, this little 10-year-old kid has shown me the love of God. About 6 months after my brother Dan died, my wife and I had our first son, Cruz. And my brother Dan never got to meet Cruz. My brother Dave, my dad, never got to meet him. But Dan did get to know what our name was if we were going to have a boy. So we added a second middle name. That's Cruz Justice Daniel. And that little guy has shown me a glimpse of what God's love for us looks like. And then the third time I feel God's pleasure is when I'm with a bunch of knuckleheads who never ran in their life but decided to sign up for a marathon because they believe kids like Maureen are worth it. 25,000 knuckleheads over the past 10 years have signed up to run marathons with us. Josephine tells me that we were the answer to her prayers, but I know the truth. She was the answer to mine. John's question had a profound impact on me, and I searched the Bible for a verse or a story that would speak to why I had such a hard time experiencing God's pleasure. And what I found was something much more personal. You guys maybe you've heard people talk about a life verse. That never made sense to me. I could imagine having a verse of the month, maybe a verse of the year, but how can you find one verse out of the whole Bible that's you're going to stick with it the rest of your life? Well, a couple of months after my brother passed, I found mine. And it's so much my life verse that that's what my tattoo on my arm is. I believe that this verse is a guiding verse for my entire life. It's Psalm 34:18. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted, and he rescues those whose spirits are crushed. Well, I shared a little while ago that I've learned the hard way that there's more pain and heartache in this world for us than I could have ever imagined. Now, here's the deal with pain. Either you've already experienced a pain like what I'm talking about and you can deeply relate, or maybe you're in the midst of a painful experience right now. Something unimaginable is going on in your life. Or, at some point, you will face this type of pain. It is inevitable. You will not escape it. This life is full of pain. If you look at our heroes in the Bible, from the beginning to the end, every biblical hero, their spiritual journey was forged through pain and trials and suffering and heartache. And that's still how God forges our spiritual journeys. It is the fact that this life holds a pain, the likes of which we can't even understand. If you haven't felt it yet, it's only fair to warn you it's going to come. Jesus says, in this world you will have trouble. What does this verse have to say to us, to me, when I'm facing that type of pain? The Lord is close to the brokenhearted, He will rescue those whose spirits are crushed. It tells me that when I am brokenhearted, the Lord is close to me. When my spirit is crushed, he will rescue me. Well, what about others? It's so easy to get caught up in our own pain, and we forget that there are other people around us that are going through hard times too. I remember when I was a kid and when things weren't going my way, I'd say, that's just not fair, that's not fair. And my parents would say, life's not fair. Life's not fair, Michael. And they were joking, but isn't there a lot of truth in that statement? You ever catch yourself looking around when things are tough going, life's not fair, that's not fair? I do. I look at my friends who haven't lost a single family member, and I think, why me? Why have I lost so many people close to me, and these people haven't lost anyone? That's not fair. One time I said it out loud in front of my mom. My mom has truly experienced some heartache, but she reminded me of some of the things that truly aren't fair in this world. She said, Michael, there are kids who don't have clean water to drink. There's kids who don't have food to eat. There are refugees right now fleeing their homeland because of wars going on, and they're on the road day after day in seek of shelter and safety. There are little kids being forced to be child soldiers in armies. That's the kind of stuff that's not fair. So yes, I've faced some incredible pain in my life, but I've also had the opportunity to see the other pain and suffering that goes on in this world all around us all the time. What does this verse have to say to those people? The Lord is close to the brokenhearted, and he rescues those whose spirits are crushed. It says, when they are brokenhearted, the Lord is close to them, and when their spirits are crushed, he will rescue them. Well, a couple of years before my dad died, my brother Dan gave him a journal called A Father's Legacy, and this journal was really awesome. At the top of every page was a question, and my dad only wrote on about 15 pages before he passed, but here's one of the last ones he wrote on. At the top of the page, it asks this question: what is the spiritual legacy you would like to leave for others, and why is it important to you? Here's his response. He wrote it on his way home from an amputee camp in Sierra Leone, Africa, where during the Civil War they were fitting people with makeshift prosthetic limbs. Several pages in this book were written on my Sierra Leone trip, October 2001, and this is my last one on the way home. As I sit here in a first-class seat and think back of the people on the streets of Freetown, the poverty now that I've seen in Haiti, Nicaragua, and now in Freetown has forever changed my life. The absolute luxury we enjoy here in America is hard to enjoy once you've seen our fellow man living in poverty, not knowing if they will have a next meal or when they will have a next meal. What spiritual legacy do I want to leave? Only that we will remember the poor and do what we can to relieve their suffering. What I've come to believe is there is often very little we can do about our own pain. It's there, we have to deal with it, we have to manage it, but there's often little we can do to change our own situation. But there is almost always something we can do to relieve the pain of others. Almost always. And I think that's one of the things that brings about the most healing for ourselves, is serving others. And it's something God expects from us. It's tough though, isn't it? It's tough to be around hurting people. If you've ever had a family member battle addiction, or a friend who's in depression, or a young person with an eating disorder or battling an addiction, any of these things, it's tough. What if you're trying to tutor a kid and they just don't even seem to want your help? It's tough being around hurting people, especially if we're not in the midst of pain. But if we truly want to be close to where God is, we better go there. Because God tells us he is close to the brokenhearted. So if we want to be near God, we need to be close to the brokenhearted. Right now, all around you, in this church, at your work, in your school, in your family, in your neighborhood, there are people going through the most painful, unimaginable things they ever dreamed they could face. How will you meet them in their pain? The Lord is close to the brokenhearted, and he rescues those whose spirits are crushed. I want to remind you of this. Today you are finding yourself brokenhearted. The Lord is near you. And if your spirit is crushed, he can rescue you. Crossbridge invites you in a lot of different ways to step into the lives of hurting people through ministries like Feed His Children or Celebrate Recovery, small groups with a focus on grief or single moms or addicts or mothers of addicts. There's a lot of ways that you're invited into the lives of hurting people. And I want to encourage you, maybe God is calling you deeper into one of those ministries or to step in for the first time. Or maybe He's calling you to run a marathon. I am really excited that we're putting a team together for the Chicago Marathon from Crossbridge. We had 22 people sign up last night. Blew us away. Highest sign up from a Saturday night service we've ever seen. It's going to be amazing. But here's the deal. Some of you have already checked out. You're already feeling that fear. I'm scared. I don't think I can do it. I want to tell you, we are not a team of runners. About 75% of our folks have never run in their lives. You may be thinking you're too old, you're too out of shape, you're too this, you're too that. You're not. We can get you from the couch to the finish line. And we've done it for 25,000 people. 4 weeks ago, we had an 82-year-old guy finish the LA Marathon with us. He didn't start running until his 70s. Okay? In just a minute, you're going to see a video of what our team looks like. All walks of life, all shapes and sizes. If you could have seen the meeting last night, Pastor Kevin was like, wow, you told the truth, Chitwood. Lots of different people sign up. But here's the deal. The toughest part for many of you will be just admitting that you're even considering it. That voice in your head is telling you, are you kidding? You can't run a marathon. I just want to invite you to consider for 10 minutes that it might be possible. Right after service, right down front in the first few rows, we're going to have a short 10-minute information meeting. We're going to talk to you about what it would take to run the Chicago Marathon and radically change the lives of kids in Africa. I believe, like I said, just about every amazing thing in this life happens when we step through fear. I want to invite you to step through fear today. In a minute, we're going to show a video. Before we do that, I'm going to close in prayer. But as you watch that video, I want you to think about this. Right now, it's late afternoon in East Africa. And there's a little girl just like Maureen, just now returning from an all-day search for water, carrying a 40-pound jerry can of dirty water that's going to make her sick. And today you have an opportunity to say yes to something that could change the rest of her life. I want to invite you, just for a few minutes, to consider listening to that whisper. Let me pray, and then we're going to watch a video. God, thanks so much for this congregation, for this church family. I want to pray for anyone here who's going through the worst thing they've ever faced in their life, through something unimaginable. We know that there are folks facing that right now. I want to pray that they would be reminded that you are near to them. And God, I want to pray for the rest of us that we would know how to step into the lives of hurting people in a way that we represent you. And we come around them and love them in a way that they just can't even understand. Lord, we just pray these things in your name. Join me and watch this video. Thanks.
In 2006, one man heard a divine whisper that he could help the most vulnerable kids in the world by running marathons. So he said yes. He felt God ask him to invite others into the same vision, so he did. Many people felt scared of the unknown. Fear prevailed, and they said no. But many people pushed through that fear, and they said yes. The first year, 100 people said yes. The next year, 400 said yes. Then 1,000, then 2,000. As people said yes to new challenges and to changing the lives of kids and communities in Africa, their own lives started to change in drastic ways.
I started this year. This is my first year. I have only been out of a wheelchair for 2 years now.
In the beginning, I was like, my knees, I got too much weight, hold on. But I stuck with it.
And I just went all in. I thought I'm 55, why not? Bev did it at 60, I'll do it at 55.
This has really brought me back, helped me recommit my life to the Lord, but also to those less fortunate.
And plus the goal of bringing clean water, that's beautiful. So I was like, this is something I really want to do.
We really did a lot of training, just the two of us, and it was such a bonding moment of that
That time when your strength is faltering and the person next to you carries you through it.
Well, I've lost 75 pounds through this.
And I couldn't imagine my 7-year-old having to go run and get water for our family. So that what keeps me motivated and focused.
I plan on running a marathon every single year until I die. Wow! We'll see how that happens or how that goes.
Over the last 10 years, over 25,000 people have joined Team World Vision, and they just keep saying that magic word, yes. Every one of those yeses also represents kids in Africa who get to say yes to life, yes to health, yes to an education, yes to hope. Hundreds of thousands of kids. Every movement, every revival, every revolution in the history of mankind has begun because someone said yes. They are yes people. We are yes people. You are one too. As long as there are children in this world without clean water, we will continue saying yes.